Hey, folks. Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast live stream. It is Wednesday, April 3rd, and things are happening, and that's putting it lightly, in the world's most chaotic and volatile region, the Middle East. We're going to break down what's happening, why it all matters to you, no matter where you live. Again, welcome to the newscast. We've got people from around the world with us. We'll have thousands with us before we are done, and you're with us for such a time as this, as the prophetic chess pieces are moving on the board. Okay, here's the backdrop for what we are about to talk about, and that is Russia.
Russian metal shingle.
Forces increasing their presence on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights. That means that they are literally staring across the border into Israel, into the Israeli side of the Golan Heights, a place where I've spent a great amount of time, folks, over the past many years. How did we get here? Number one. Number two, what is Europe saying about Israel's strike on Monday, April 1st, which eliminated one of the top terror masters in the Iranian regime, Mohammad Reza Zahedi, a top official in Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps? And what comes next now that Israel carried out this daring targeting of Zahedi and eliminated 7 officials from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps in that Damascus strike? What comes next? How does Iran respond? Because you know they will. Now, if you missed our newscast unpacking that attack, by the way, on Monday, check it out here in our archives. Just go right to newscast, and right under newscast here on the Watchman YouTube channel, you can find all of our videos. And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. Folks, things are happening so fast, and it's such just an unexpected clip in some ways. Hey, Monday was a big shock to a lot of people. It was another level for Israel, the highest ranking Iranian official taken out since the Gaza war began on October 7th, that shocked many around the world. And those are the kinds of world-shaking events, again, that matter to you no matter where you live, that you need to know about. That's why we want to be your one-stop shop here on the Watchman News channel. Be sure to join us here as watchmen and women on the wall every single day. Okay, let's get into this. Russia. About 2 weeks ago, we did a video about this here on the newscast, again, in the archives. And we talked about Russian forces pushing closer to the Israel-Syria border. Well, we've got an escalation there on Russia's part to report on today, folks. Russia just built or installed its 3rd military post right on that Israel-Syria border on the Syrian side. Now, this is southern Syria on the Golan Heights. Remember, when I say the Golan, you have the Syrian side of the heights and the Israeli side of the heights. This is on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights. Now, that's southern Syria. About 2 years ago, 2022, Russia mainly withdrew its forces that had been in that area. And they did that, obviously, because the Ukraine war kicked off. Russia invaded Ukraine. And we talked about this back then, that Russia had pulled some of its forces from Syria and essentially relocated them to the battlefields in Ukraine. I'm sorry. Well, that all changed a few months ago. November 2023, all of a sudden, Russian forces started creeping back into southern Syria after being absent for a while, or largely absent at least. Why did they do that? Clearly, this was in the aftermath of the October 7th massacre that Hamas, an Iranian proxy, carried out, and Israel began. And we saw the fruits of that on Monday with the takeout of Mohammad Reza Zahedi. Israel began upping its attacks in Syria. And we've talked about here in the newscast over the past several weeks that Iranian sources on the ground in Syria have said, wow, Israel is basically shooting to kill. I mean, they're really upping their attacks. They're going after more high-value targets and with greater just barrages of firepower that they're using in Syria. So it was a noticeable increase by Israel in Syria, and for good reason. October 7th does not happen without the Iranian regime. And you might say, well, Erick, I've seen some reports that Iran didn't know that this was coming, that October 7th surprised them. Well, maybe Hamas moved a little sooner than Iran thought they would, maybe without Iran knowing. Maybe Iran didn't give the order, but Iran planned to give the order. Hamas may have gotten ahead of themselves. Okay, put all that aside. At the end of the day, Iran knew this was coming eventually. They knew October 7th was coming eventually. Why do I say that? Well, a few weeks before October 7th, we had some 500 Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives in Iran training. I wonder what they were training for. It wasn't for the Olympics. It was for an eventual attack against the world's one and only Jewish state. And Hezbollah to the north has been training for an October 7th style assault on Israel for decades. And this is all at the behest of the Iranian regime. I say all that to say, yeah, Israel has increased its attacks against Iran to send a message. Now, those attacks have mainly been in Syria and in Lebanon, Iranian assets in those two countries. But remember, Iran and Hezbollah are not the only actors in Syria. It's kind of a crossroads for rogue regimes. You've got, of course, Iran and Hezbollah there. They've been there, folks, and according to them, they're not going anywhere. So what you essentially have is a collision course between the Iranian axis and Israel over Syria. And the Assad regime, which rules over Syria, well, that might be a stretch, right? Which once ruled over Syria with an iron fist, which still maintains an iron fist, which is, although itself ruled over, the Assad regime, it answers to Iran and it answers to Russia. So you've got Iran, Hezbollah, the Assad regime itself, Russian forces, thousands of them have been in Syria since September 2015. Turkey is there, Erdogan. You've had al-Qaeda, ISIS elements obviously there throughout the years. And many, when I talked about this a little while ago, many commented, what about the United States? They're there too, and they weren't invited. It's okay that Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah are there because they were invited, but America wasn't invited. Well, guess what? ISIS wasn't invited into Syria either, nor was al-Qaeda. Initially, the American troop presence in Syria was because of that. And they'll still say, the Biden administration will still say, we're only in Iraq and Syria to make sure ISIS doesn't rear its head again and reconstitute itself. But that's why American forces entered Syria, because of ISIS. And they say they're still there because of ISIS, because of the threat of ISIS reconstituting itself. But folks, at the end of the day, the real threat in, say, eastern Syria and Iraq, where we have a U.S. troop presence and a small presence, about 900 soldiers in Syria, about a little over 2,000 in Iraq. The main reason they're there is to provide a buffer between Iran and the rest of the region. And that's the real reason. The Iranian regime and its proxies, listen, I was in and around Mosul in northern Iraq, which was the main battlefield against ISIS some years ago, a decade ago. I was with the Kurdish Peshmerga, and they said, look, it just flipped overnight. ISIS was gone, the caliphate was disbanded, and Iranian-backed militias moved right in. So that is the main threat and the main concern of U.S. forces there now. And to me, if the U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria withdraw, then Iran has an easy pass across the region to the Mediterranean Sea, to Israel's doorstep. They've already done it. I mean, look, through Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. So Iran really, in a lot of ways, folks, has accomplished its goal of establishing that arc, stretching from Iran all the way to the Mediterranean. They've encircled Israel with a ring of fire, as we've talked about many, many times. Whether it's Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, the Houthis in Yemen, and now in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, Iran trying to open a new front against Israel. But all of these rogue actors converge in Syria. So Israel has upped attacks in Syria against Iran and Hezbollah. Because if Israel doesn't do that, if Israel doesn't have freedom of movement in the skies above Syria, then Iran and Hezbollah will continue their long march to the Golan Heights. And they will do what they've done in southern Lebanon, which is establish a terror base on Israel's doorstep. It's already happened in Lebanon. Hezbollah has well over, at this point, 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at every inch of Israel. So it's already happened at this point in Lebanon. Israel says, no, we won't let you do it in southern Syria as well. We must push you back. That's first. Secondly, we must be able to intercept and destroy weapons convoys and highly advanced precision-guided munitions that Iran is trying to transit through Syria into the hands of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. And whether it's the Houthis firing rockets and missiles at Eilat, whether it's another rocket hitting Eilat, the southernmost city in Israel, resort town, a beautiful resort town, by the way, on Sunday, launched from Iraq, apparently, whether it's Hamas, Hezbollah. Folks, Israel's had enough. October 7th was the breaking point of Iranian-sponsored terror against Israel, and Israel is now saying, you know what? It's one thing to hit back against the tentacles of the octopus, Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad. But what about hitting back at the head of the octopus? And that would be Iran itself. And that brings us to the attack on Monday. And we'll get into Russia in a minute. This has prophetic implications, what's happening with Russia. Let's rewind to Monday real quick, April 1st, an earth-shaking, region-shaking event in the Middle East. And by the way, if you want to hear more about this kind of content, Stakelbeck Tonight, my brand new show on TBN, every weeknight, Monday through Friday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, with a re-air every night at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you missed the first showing, you can certainly catch the second showing every Monday through Friday. And we dig into this a bunch on tomorrow night's show. We've got on-the-ground reporting from Israel. We'll break this down. You won't want to miss it. And tonight, by the way, we've got a report from London. We're going around the world, folks, on this show, Stakelbeck Tonight, my brand new show, just launched last week. And from London, we will talk about hate crime legislation in Scotland and soon to possibly be passed in Canada. Throughout the Western world, this is catching on. And if you have a biblical view on, say, human sexuality, and you dare to comment on it, you might be in a whole lot of legal trouble if these laws continue to pass. And as an American, my first question is, could it come here to the United States? You won't want to miss that tonight. Tomorrow, we're on the ground in Israel. Great stuff every night on Stakelbeck Tonight. But let's rewind to Monday. And again, that's 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 10:30 p.m. Eastern every weeknight on TBN and the TBN app, TBN Plus. Some of the facts. Mohammad Reza Zahedi in a consulate, the Iranian embassy compound in Damascus, the Syrian capital, with a pinpoint strike, Israeli F-35s. The entire building apparently collapsed with him inside it, and 7 other members of the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, and some members from Hezbollah. Surprise, surprise. Now, Zahedi was the highest ranking, and Israel has taken several out since October 7th, but Zahedi was another level, highest ranking, really one of the highest ranking members of the Iranian regime, essentially in charge of all of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's terror operations throughout Syria and Lebanon. This was a very big fish who for decades had been behind terror attacks against Israel and Israeli interests. And the Iranian regime now is feeling this. They felt the death of Qasem Soleimani in January 2020. They're feeling this. They felt the death of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh in November 2020, who was the father of the Iranian bomb, Iran's nuclear program. This is big. It can't be underestimated. They are feeling this. And essentially, folks, I talked about taking it to the head of the octopus, right? We said it a minute ago. If you have an embassy, that is considered sovereign territory for that particular country. U.S. embassy in Pakistan or or Russia or wherever, or England or the UK, wherever, Ireland. It's sovereign U.S. territory. So basically, Israel struck Iran directly in Damascus, and a building collapsed of their embassy compound. So you could use the word, and many in the left-wing mainstream media around the world have used the word escalation to describe what Israel did. To me, Iran had been escalating and escalating and escalating, and this was a response by Israel. Iran's really been escalating since 1979, folks, when that Iranian revolution, that wicked regime took hold. And guess what? Rarely has the Iranian regime faced any consequences. They always act through proxy, and they call it plausible deniability. I call it implausible deniability, but Iran says we didn't do it. We can't control those militias in Iraq and Syria who were killing, say, American troops. We didn't give the green light for October 7th when 1,200 Jews were massacred in the biggest massacre, the bloodiest massacre of the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Wasn't us. They're part of the resistance, as Iran would call it, Hamas and the militias and Hezbollah, but they act independently. We're not our brother's keeper. We don't control their every movement. Maybe not their every movement, but folks, overall, this is a bold-faced lie. Hezbollah does not exist without Iran. It literally does not exist. Hezbollah is Iran West. Southern Lebanon has turned into Iran West. That's what Hezbollah is. It's a fully funded, created arm of the Iranian regime. Secondly, again, arguably, Hamas and Islamic Jihad don't exist without Iran's continued support. And October 7th doesn't happen. Training, arming, everything. And yet Iran is sat back, and not the Iranian people who we love dearly. Hey, Iran is a Bible land. That's ancient Persia. That's Mordecai, Esther, Cyrus, and Darius from your Bible. And the Iranian people are the main victims of this wicked regime. But the regime has sat back and said, we didn't do it. Our hands are clean. Well, Israel's at the point after October 7th, which was the ultimate escalation. We're talking escalation. And after October 8th, when Hezbollah began firing on a daily basis rockets into northern Israel, Israel says enough. We got to go to the head of the snake, the head of the octopus. We got to hit Iran where it hurts. We have to hit them directly. And that's what happened on Monday. And the world doesn't like it. The European Union is howling. The EU, I'm going to pull this up real quick. The EU has condemned what Israel did. And wait to hear what Russia's doing. EU, I'm reading this right from the Times of Israel, condemns attack on Damascus mission that killed top Iranian generals. Wait a minute. Let me preface this by saying Europe, in Iran's view, is an enemy of Iran. Iran has carried out attacks on European soil. It's plotted terror in Europe against Iranian dissidents. It considers Europe an infidel enemy. How craven and weak is this of the EU to release this statement? Instead of standing in solidarity with Israel, it shares common enemies with Israel just as America does. Europe's enemies are Israel's enemies, whether Europe wants to acknowledge it or not, whether the Biden administration wants to acknowledge it or not. They could try to create daylight and distance themselves and save face, distance themselves from reckless Israel, but it doesn't matter. We said last week on the live stream, Iran still groups America and Europe in with Israel. We're all just a big bag of infidels all grouped in together. And you can try to distance yourself from Israel, but it ain't happening. In Iran's eyes, you're one and the same. Great Satan, little Satan. Nonetheless, the Biden administration reportedly on Monday directly contacted Iran and said, hey, we didn't know about this. Hey, we didn't know that Israel was going to do this. The hit on Zahedi in Damascus. How weak. Basically saying, don't hit us. We didn't know. We had nothing to do with this. We swear we didn't do it. How weak. Israel is your greatest ally, if not in the world, at least in the Middle East, your only real ally. And Iran is an enemy of the United States with American blood on its hands. And I'm sure a good chunk of that blood can be traced back to Mohammad, Reza, Zahedi. Hundreds, if not thousands, of U.S. troops in Iraq over the years, killed by Iranian-supplied IEDs and roadside bombs. The list goes on and on and on. An Iranian journalist was just brutally attacked in London last week, most likely by the regime's agents. And you throw Israel under the bus to the Iranians. We didn't do it. It was all them. We had nothing to do with it. Please don't hurt us. How sad. This European statement. Let's read it, folks. The European Union today condemned the airstrike, and it said, in this highly tense regional situation, why is it tense? Tehran. It is imperative to show utmost restraint. This is dictated to Israel, lecturing Israel. The principle of the inviolability of blah, 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 diplomatic and consular premises and personnel must be respected in accordance with international law. This is Diplo speak, saying that Israel is not respecting international law by striking the Iranian embassy. Whereas if I only saw such fiery statements from the EU every time Iran and its proxies violate international law, but I digress. But there you have it. When Israel looks to the West, it sees weak knees, cravenness. I like to say when I talk about Europe today that Winston Churchill, for instance, is turning in his grave. So Israel at times truly feels alone. Here's the good news. The God of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. He's still on the throne. And when it comes to his land and his people, he's very much alert and involved. Number two, there are millions upon millions and many thousands watching this live stream right now of Bible-believing Christians who know that this is not just any other country, not any other land. This is God's land. And he has a great plan for the land of Israel, a prophetic plan. And we'll stand with God's land and God's people, come what may. So that brings us to Russia. Russian forces deploying increasingly to that Israel-Syria border. Some facts here, folks. I mentioned earlier on, 2022, Russian forces mainly left. November 2023, they started to come back. And Israel upped its attacks. In Russia's absence from southern Syria, Israel increased its attacks against Iranian assets there, and with good reason. Now Russia's trickling back. And now, since the beginning of this year alone, folks, in only 3 months, we've had 3 Russian military posts established on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights. Again, Russian forces staring into Israel. 3 military posts in the past 3 months alone. What's happening here? Why is Russia doing this? More from the Jerusalem Post. I'm just going to read this directly to you from my phone. Bear with me. Here we go. The title of this piece in the Jerusalem Post, A Message to Israel, it asks, Russia deploys more forces in Syria's Golan Heights. The forces from Russia's military police were tasked with de-escalating tensions in the Syrian provinces of Quneitra and Dara. Now, folks, I've been on that Golan Heights, that area, that border region many times. Quneitra, Dara, I've, in previous years, looked across the border, saw plumes of smoke, heard the artillery fire as ISIS and other forces were battling the Assad regime right there on Israel's doorstep. Now Hezbollah, Iran, Russia have moved in. It never ends, but it's right there in the Golan. By the way, the Golan, if you haven't been, beautiful. One of the most beautiful regions in Israel, if not on earth. Fresh air, mountainous, God's creation on full display. Russia's defense ministry announced today that it had deployed additional forces in the Syrian-controlled areas of the Golan Heights, where Israel had allegedly struck at an increasing rate over the last few months. The forces from Russia's military police are monitoring the long-standing ceasefire issued as part of the Syrian civil war. Good luck. But Quneitra and Dara are the places, and according to Russia, military posts belonging to the Syrian military are located below the Russian observation post set up to monitor, quote, this is key here, folks, possible provocations. Now, pray tell, what could those provocations be and who would they be from? Israel could be only source of what Russia is talking about there with provocations. So Russia now is perched on Israel's border with Syria. This comes days after, on Monday, Russia roundly condemned that strike in Damascus. No surprise there. There's been some vicious rhetoric by Russia's foreign ministry against Israel in the past 2 years, and we've reported it here in the newscast. So we have the Russian condemnation. Now, the very day, by the way, I mentioned 3 military posts. The third post was just set up on Monday, the day of the takeout of Zahedi. What do we have here? Why? Why is this happening? Folks, number one, it's prophetic. Let's get into that in a second. But let's just mention, I've used this term many times here, talking about the Russia-Iran relationship over the past 2 years. Quid pro quo. Meaning, the Iranian regime has supplied Russia with thousands of attack drones that it's used to great and deadly effect in Ukraine in the past 2 years. It's reportedly also supplying Russia with short-range, medium-range ballistic missiles, as is North Korea also providing armaments, China, the Gathering Storm Coalition, as I call them. So they're helping Russia out in a major way militarily. Yes, Russia needs its armaments, its military stockpiles replenished. It's looking to Iran to replenish them. Secondly, Iran is providing diplomatic cover as much as it can at the UN and in other international bodies. Iran has stood by Russia through thick and thin, as most of the world has condemned Russia for the Ukraine invasion. And Russia, a pariah state in many ways now, Iran certainly a pariah state, and they're grouping together. This is not altogether surprising, but Iran is not doing this out of the goodness of its heart. No, no, no. What does Iran get in return? Folks, I believe one aspect of this relationship, the quid pro quo element, is that Iran has to be pressing Russia and saying, hey, the Zionist entity is pretty much embarrassing us left and right in Syria. And Russia, they're doing it under your noses. I can speak. The Zahedi takeout happened on Monday while thousands of Russian troops were firmly entrenched in Syria. Russia's letting this happen. They've called it a deconfliction mechanism with Israel, where basically Israel gives Russia a heads up, says we're going into Syria, make sure you're not around, and Russia says, okay. Russia has stepped back since they entered Syria. Russia entered Syria in September 2015. Russia has stepped back and said, okay, Israel, operate freely. Is that coming to an end? We have to ask. Is the moment at hand? I've had a sense that that's coming, where eventually Russia is going to lay down the gauntlet and say, Israel, no more. We will not allow you to operate freely in Syria any longer, and strike our good friends and allies, Iran and Hezbollah, and the Assad regime for that matter. Is it at an end? As Russia increases forces right on that border. Here we are. And here we are on the cusp as we close here, I believe, of Bible prophecy. People might say, oh, you can't believe that stuff. Well, guess what? Every prophecy in the Bible has come true. There's a 100% accuracy rate, and there's much still to come. And I believe that Russia will eventually lead. I'm not saying it's tomorrow, not even next year, but eventually, who knows? Could be sooner, could be later. But the key is the groundwork is being laid right now. We saw it on October 7th. We see with Hezbollah, all the chess pieces falling into place. And the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, describes a war called the War of Gog and Magog. Funny name, I know, but you should know it. And describes a day when Russia, I believe it's Russia, some differ with me, and that's okay. It's not a salvation issue. We just have a different view on that prophetic passage, and that's okay. Russia, Persia, Iran clearly named. I believe Turkey will be involved in that latter days. Ezekiel calls it a latter days confederation that comes against Israel. Now, they don't get very far, not to give away the ending, spoiler alert, but they perish on the mountains of Israel as God intervenes in a way that he hasn't in such a public way in 2,000 years for the entire world to see. That's coming. But Russia, Iran, Turkey, Do we see, I leave you with this, what do you think? Is the groundwork being laid right now? Am I completely off base? Never in history have Russia, Iran, and Turkey been so close as they are now. They were at each other's throats for centuries. They fought wars against each other. Now they're all in league, they're all together, and they're all on Israel's border. You do the math. We live, folks, interesting, maybe the understatement of the year. Bible times, I believe, prophetic times. And you know what? We are here right now to be ambassadors for Christ. And you might say, oh gosh, it's so terrible. It's a perilous time. Why am I here now? I wish I lived back then, whenever. Well, God put you on this earth at this particular stage in history for a reason. And for me, I'm going to be an ambassador for Christ. I'm going to try and provide light in the darkness and take advantage of every moment that God Almighty has given me. Jesus never said, hey, until I return, you just sit over there on the couch and you wait for me. I'll be back. Just sit tight. No. That's not how it works. We are to be proactive as followers of Jesus, as believers. And that could be many ways. You don't have to be talking on YouTube or on TV like I'm doing. Everyone has a role to play behind the scenes, in front of the camera. All are equally important, and God is in control. And that's a great thing. I'm going to clutch on to the hem of his garment right now and just say, Lord, lead the way. It's dark, but you're the light, and I want to be with the light. And we'll keep shining that light right here in the Watchman. Hey, thanks so much for joining us here today on the Watchman. Until tomorrow, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.